Hello Year 10, I'm just going to talk you through today's lesson. Today you're mainly going to be writing, so I don't want to talk to you for too long because I want to give you the opportunity to spend plenty of time writing. The next few slides, as it says on here, are just going to talk you through how to write the comparagraphs that you're going to write when you're comparing London and checking out my history. It asks you to write between 2 or 3 detailed comparagraphs. I imagine in the time you've got, you'll probably end up writing 2 of them. And that's fine as long as you're following the structure that I'm about to tell you about. Okay, so if you remember back to when we looked at writing comparagraphs when we were writing about the war poems, it follows this structure. So we have a linking statement at the beginning of the paragraph that will link both of the poems together. For example, both poems explore the idea of a loss of power through control. So that's the first sentence of your paragraph will begin with the words both in some way. So you'll have a sentence that links both of the poems together. The paragraph will then continue with you doing a C's for the first poem. In this case, that's London. So you'll do your first C's on London. That stays within the same paragraph. Then you have a connecting sentence to link to the next poem. So whereas the loss of power in checking out my history is much more personal. Remember, the idea of having much more sentences or much less sentences really start to show a comparison. So they're really useful to have within your comparagraphs. Then you go on to do the C's for checking out my history, and you will then use the notes from checking out my history to do that. And then you end the paragraph with a linking statement again, because remembering that this is all about comparison. So the end sentence will be something like, therefore, both poets show the loss of power through the control the government had upon the societies they were living in. So it's just a summary of how they're both similar in some way and how they both show the loss of power. So on the next few slides, I'm going to show you how to turn the notes that you made previously this week into those comparagraphs, into those big comparagraphs that we've just looked at, that structure there. We're going to look at how we turn our notes from previous lessons into those. And I'm going to do one with you. So throughout the week, we've been looking at these statements here. We did the statements for London first, and you wrote these sheets for that. And then we did the statements for checking out my history yesterday, and you did some C statements for those as well by filling in some of the gaps. You'll notice how they are linked. So the first one about Blake is critical of the restrictions placed on London and those who live there is similar to Agar is critical of the Eurocentric history he was taught in school. So I have matched them up. So each one of those across will be the start of your comparagraph. So you could do a comparagraph on number 1, comparagraph on number 2, comparagraph on number 3, and comparagraph on number 4. Now, remember, I've only asked you to do 2 comparagraphs really this lesson. If you can get to 3, superb. The first one I have done as an example, so don't write that one. And then you can choose 2 from the next 3. So you could do number 2, number 3, or number 4. I'll show you what I mean by looking at number 1. So this is the process of what you go through. So I'm going to look at statement number 1. Blake is critical of the restrictions placed on London and those who live there, and Agar is critical of the Eurocentric history he was taught in school. And so here's the statement. So I'm going to turn these statements into my first comparagraph. So Blake is critical of the restrictions placed on London and those who live there. Agar is critical of the Eurocentric history he was taught in school. Now, the first thing I need to think about in this thinking box is I need to think about, what do these statements have in common? What's the link between them? So I could use some of the words from these statements to create my linking statement. So I could say this: they are both critical, because look, they're both critical. They're both critical of the institutions they feel cause an imbalance of power. This one's critical of the people who put restrictions on London. This one's critical of the people who organised the Eurocentric history. In fact, both of those are the government. They're both critical of the institutions they feel cause an imbalance of power. They're both, oh sorry, there's a typo there. They both feel that the government has abused their power. Okay, so that should say they. So that's what I could say. Or I could simplify that even further to make the sentence shorter. And I could say both poets blame the government for the loss of power experienced by those in the poem. This one blames them for the restrictions. This one blames them for the Eurocentric history. Okay, so I've got my linking statement. I can choose either one of those. They're my linking statements there. I could choose this one if I want to be fancy pants, or I could choose this one if I want to make it more succinct. Both of them are good. Then what I would need to do for step 2 is go back to my notes for the statement from London. So Blake is critical of the restrictions placed on London, those who live there. I go back to my notes and I write my C's paragraph based on this. So remembering that I'm going back to my steps now. I've done my linking statement and now I'm on my step 2, which is C's for poem 1, London. So that's this bit. So I've already got my notes, so I can just piece all that together to write my C's out. In a moment, I'll show you what that looks like. Then I need step 3. Step 3 for my comparagraph is a connecting sentence, because I'm going to go move on to now to checking out my history. So, however, the loss of power experienced in Agar's poem is much more personal. Therefore, his criticism of those in power is more about his feelings about being controlled and manipulated. Because remember, Agar experienced this loss of power himself because of his education in Guyana. So I'm going to say that the difference is that Agar's is a bit more personal. I could simplify that, couldn't I, to make a shorter sentence, which could be, however, the loss of power presented in checking out my history is much more personal. And that says the same thing. Okay. So I've now got my connecting sentence. So now I need to do a C's for checking out my history. Now, this is the C's for the first statement. You had some of this given to you and some gaps to fill in yesterday, some dots for you to fill in. So look at the notes from yesterday and then you would put that all together to create the C's that goes with checking out my history. And then the final thing we'd need for step 5 for my comparagraph is a summary at the end that links the 2 poems back together again. And most of those sentences will always begin with therefore, because I'm summing up the point I've made. You could say something fancy like, therefore, both poets criticise the government for the loss of power people experience. Blake seems scathing of their policies, whereas Agar ridicules them, and therefore this makes him seem powerful. That should be a full stop, really. Lots of typos on this, sorry. Or, more simply, you could put, therefore, both poets criticise the government for the loss of power people in the poem are experiencing. Okay, so that's my summary sentence. So remember, go all the way back. Where is it? They're the 5 steps to put my comparagraph together. These are the things you've already done. So we need to make our linking statement. Then our C's for London for that statement. Our connection to checking out my history. Our C's for checking out my history for that statement. And then a summary that begins therefore to link them back together again. So that's what it turns into if I don't edit it. So all of that put together from that PowerPoint looks like that. And that to me feels quite overwhelming. That's quite a lot of writing for one comparagraph. If I put all of this together, that would form an excellent paragraph. So we're really talking grade 9 here. So don't worry too much if you find that completely overwhelming. I think that's a lot to put together. Having said that, all I have done is copied down all the bits from the boxes that I've given you. So that isn't perhaps too difficult, but that is it all put together without any particular editing. So it goes, the red bit at the top, you have your linking statement. Then the blue bit is the C's all put together, all of those notes put together from the London C's. Then the connecting sentence, then all the bits put together for the checking out my history C's, and then the linking statement at the end. which is absolutely fine. You could just copy all those notes down and do it like that. Having said that, a more realistic version might look like this. So this is edited down to make a secure paragraph, and a secure paragraph is a very good paragraph, a really good paragraph, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this at all. I've just taken out a few of the points about London, changed some of the phrasing slightly, used the simplified versions of the statements. So I'll just read this to you, and this is really what you're aiming for a secure paragraph, bearing in mind I would like you to write 2 more of these at least. So both poets blame the government for the loss of power they experience. Blake feels that there is a loss of power through the restrictions imposed by the government. I wander down each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow. The repetition of chartered highlights how controlled London has become by those who have money and therefore power. The chartered Thames shows how even nature is being controlled and owned by the powerful. This shows a loss of power because Blake is horrified by the growing divide between the rich and the poor, and the government have previously that sentence isn't the right way around. Have previously, it's meant to say, have sold off previously public spaces to the rich. However, the loss of power in checking out my history is far more personal. Agar is critical of the Eurocentric education he received when he was at school in Guyana. Don't tell me about 1066 and all that. Don't tell me about Dick Whittington and Cat. Agar mocks his education by placing historical facts next to nursery rhyme characters. This suggests that his history education was ridiculous and was all just stories. This shows his loss of power because his education seemed trivial to him as he did not learn about anything relevant to his identity. Therefore, both poets criticise the government for the loss of power people in the poem are experiencing because of what was imposed upon them by those in power. So a really clear structure, and in this example, there's lots of reference to loss of power. Remember, that is what our question is about. So you can use that phrase again and again. So what you have got to do is now you've got to write a minimum of 2 seized paragraphs like that for other sections that you have prepared earlier. So I've done the linking statement for the next paragraph for you, and you can use that if you want to, or you can just leave it alone. And then you need to use the notes that you've prepared this week to write the paragraphs, okay, and making sure that you follow the comparagraph structure. So you can look back at the examples when you're writing your own. So I've done the next one for you for paragraph 2. Both poets describe the loss of power experienced by people in their poems. And then this links to statement 2 of the C's that you prepared last week for London. However, the experience described by Agar is much more personal, so is more focused on the oppression experienced by the speaker. Again, his is more personal, so I'll reference that. And then that links to this statement 2 from checking out my history. And then I would use that to write my C's for checking out my history. So you could copy that completely if you wanted to. Agar presents a lack of power experienced by himself through his education, and he was unable to learn about his own culture. That was the example I gave you yesterday. And then you would do your final linking statement for that. Other paired statements were these 2. This was statement 3 for checking out my history, and this was statement 3 for London. So you could use those 2 together to write a comparagraph. And the final choice is these 2 statements, statement 4 and statement 4. So you can put those 2 together to write the comparagraph. If you didn't get all of the notes done in the previous lessons, then just choose the ones that you have filled in, but make sure that they compare well. Make sure you're choosing pairs of statements that you can link together. Okay, so just to remind you, let's go all the way back and make you dizzy. You are following this structure. You are doing a linking statement, C's for London, connecting sentence, C's for checking out my history, a linking statement, and you are going to write 2 of those, and you can look at that example to help you write it. Okay, you do not need to copy that one out. That is there on the PowerPoint slide for you, and you just need to write 2 more. Okay, if you can write 3, brilliant. This one here, the more detailed one, is great if you are wanting to write a grade 9 answer, and I think the only difference you'll notice, apart from the fact that it's more detailed, there's some comment about structure in London in this one. The other thing that to draw your attention to is that this one focuses a little bit more on the tone that they're trying to get across. So Blake is more scathing and Agar is more ridiculing. So that's something else you could do for a grade 9 as well. Okay, I hope you found this helpful, and best of luck with your writing today. Thank you.